Mr. Ian Blackford.
Speak for Scotland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I begin by echoing the tributes of the Leader of the Opposition and the Prime Minister to members who have passed away.
Order. Can I just say two things? First of all, if people leaving the chamber could do so quickly and quietly, that would be greatly appreciated. Order. I don't require any assistance from the honourable gentleman. I do know a thing or two about this place. And secondly, it is a very considerable discourtesy for a member to walk out of the chamber by walking straight past the member who has the floor. It's so obviously a discourtesy that I'm surprised it's necessary to point it out. Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I begin by echoing the tributes of the Leader of the Opposition and the Prime Minister to members who have passed away in the last year. I also wish to pay tribute to my predecessor, the former Right Honourable Member for Murray, and to thank him for his long service to this House and to the people of his constituency. I'm sure Right Honourable and Honourable Members will agree that in the last Parliament, Angus Robertson firmly established himself as a true statesman, and although we will miss his contribution to this place, I hope that he continues to contribute to public life at a time when now more than ever our national debates need considered and rational voices. I also want to thank him for the leadership he demonstrated for the SNP at Westminster. We on these benches will miss a good friend. Now, I must say to the Prime Minister, that was a rather cheap jibe at the previous First Minister for Scotland. Let me point out that unlike the Prime Minister, at least Alex Salmond won a majority in an election in Scotland. And while she may make a rather cheap jibe at Alex Salmond, she still has a sturgeon that is very much going to be a thorn in her side. Mr. Speaker, this is the first time that this House has met since the terrible events of this summer. On behalf of SNP members, I would like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to the professionalism, the dedication and the sacrifice of our emergency services who have led the response to the awful events of this summer and to whom we all owe a tremendous great debt of gratitude. The loss of life at Grenfell Tower was tragic and unnecessary. Family and friends of the victims will be heartbroken and grief-stricken, but many will be angry too that this tragedy could and should have been avoided. I speak on behalf of SNP members when I commit our support to working with all parties in the Chamber to get those families in the country the answers that they need and that they deserve. Mr. Speaker, our summer was also marred by the cowardice and reckless violence of terrorism. The whole country is united in grief at the outrage of the attacks in Manchester at London Bridge and only this week at the Finsbury Park Mosque. In this place, we must all be united in showing leadership to all our citizens. Despite the despicable effects of a small minority of misguided individuals, our communities and our society will not be divided. We stand firm against terrorists who attack Muslims, just as we stand against those who wrongly claim to act in the name of Islam. Mr. Speaker, it is customary to commend the mover and seconder in proceedings on the Queen's speech. I pay tribute to the Right Honourable Member for Newbury, whose interest and knowledge of agriculture and fisheries issues will be important in the coming months and years, with those two areas being important sectors that will be impacted by the kind of Brexit deal that is achieved. The seconder, the Honourable Member for Spelthorne, I'm told, is a rising star of the right wing of the Conservative Party. In that regard, well, indeed, in that regard, he is a useful political compass for members on these benches, as if you're in doubt of your own position on any issue, you only need to position yourself to be diametrically opposed to whatever the view of the Honourable Member is. Mr. Speaker, although I may be a relative newcomer to this place, I was always under the impression that the Queen's speech was intended to be an event which brought stability to the government and to the country. An event where the government sets out what it intends to do and how it intends to govern. On this occasion, I cannot imagine many in the country are feeling a sense of stability. To many, These may feel like the most uncertain and unstable of times that the country is now facing. With rising inflation and low wage growth, working families will certainly not be feeling stability. They will feel uncertainty and a threat to their living standards. With a Conservative government who have perpetuated the most indiscriminate and savage cuts to social security still clinging to power, the disabled and the vulnerable will not be feeling stability and certainty.
Honourable friend, allow me.
I will happily give way.
Does he not also think that the government must give an early signal what it intends to do with regards to the closure of 8 of Glasgow's 16 job centres? They should take that off the table right away.
I fully agree that this is a matter that was much debated in the previous Parliament, and I think it is demonstrated the hardship that many of his constituents will face and in other constituencies in Glasgow. And this would be an act of compassion by the Conservative government if they were, if I can put it this way, do the right thing and remove that threat of closures to the Glasgow job centres. Mr Speaker, with the threat of a hard Brexit and the loss of access to our most important markets, our exporting businesses will not be feeling stability and certainty. Strong and stable is what the Prime Minister offered the country, but uncertain and unstable is what she has delivered. There is nothing in the Queen's speech which changes that. That is most true in respect of the United Kingdom leaving the EU. It is the biggest issue facing the United Kingdom, and this will be the greatest challenge in this Parliament. A strong and stable approach might have involved the Prime Minister seeking consensus and working to protect the country from the most damaging potential impacts of a hard Brexit. That was, after all, what the Prime Minister promised us last year. Instead, we got a Prime Minister who called an unnecessary election designed to crush any opposition to her. Well, how did that work? Her gamble having backfired. She has
in Scotland. We still
I have to say, it's pretty remarkable, because when I hear the jibes coming from opposite, we've got a government that's going to have to rely on the DUP to get any of its legislation through. When it comes to the position of Scotland, you cannot get away from the fact that the Scottish National Party still won this election. Unlike the government, we have a majority of the seats in Scotland, something that the Conservatives could only ever dream about. I will happily give way.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way, and may I begin by congratulating him on becoming leader of the SNP group in Parliament, that he is widely respected across the House and will, I think, be a brilliant leader for his troops. But doesn't he find that actually both the SNP and the Tories are in the same position? We both did less well than expectations, but we both won more votes in our respective areas.
I commend my honourable friend for the remarks he said, but I must say to him that what the Conservatives have still got to realise that we have a stable government in Scotland. Concentrating, if I must say so, on the day job. And if you want an example of strong and stable, look to what's happened in Edinburgh. And you cannot get away from the fact that there are 59 parliamentary seats in Scotland. There are 35 of us that will stand up for Scotland in this Parliament. And when it comes to defending the rights and the interests of the people of Scotland, I want to see every Scottish MP following the lead that we in the Scottish National Party will give. I happily give way.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way, and I too congratulate him on his new role. He does indeed command respect across all sides of the House. However, he mentioned earlier on that we would have to rely on the DUP in order to get legislation through. Surely there is something, whether it's the domestic abuse propositions in this, that you would support, or the gentleman would support as well. And we would like to get some of the honourable gentleman's party support for many pieces here as well.
Let me make it absolutely clear as to the role that the Scottish National Party will play in this Parliament. We will be a force for progressive politics. And I want to commend my very dear friend, the previous honourable member for Banff-and-Buchan, who was responsible for pushing through the private members' bill on the subject of the Istanbul Convention. And I will certainly commend the Scottish National Party to support the government in any reasonable moves to that regard. I want to work for us in order that we can get the best deal for the people of Scotland, and particularly when it comes to Brexit, that I'm going to move on to. I will give way one more time and I'll make some...
Honourable gentleman, I thank the honourable gentleman for giving me, congratulating him being elected leader of his party. But as he noticed, like I have, that in the Queen's speech there was no measures to deal with austerity, which suggests the government's learned nothing, and in particular the plight of WASPI women.
Well done. I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and I agree with him. I'm going to come on to these matters. But there is unfinished business, certainly for me, having been the pension spokesperson for the SNP in the last Parliament. We are not going to let the WASPI women left without a voice. And it's utterly disgraceful that some of the worst affected women were given 14 months written notice of an increase in their pensionable age. And I've said before, the ridiculous situation of a woman born in February 1953 would have retired last year in January 2016, just shy of her 63rd birthday. But a woman born a year later, in February 1954, will not retire until July 2019. She'll be 65 and a half. Quite simply, Mr Speaker, that is unacceptable, that you have a 2.5-year increase in a woman's pensionable age over a one-year period, and was identified by Cridland in his review of the state pension age. We should not be looking at an increase in pensionable age of any more than 1 year in every 10 years. And as I've often pointed out to the government, there is a very easy solution to this, and that is that we reverse the Pensions Act of 2011. And the cost of doing that would be £8 billion, which is easily affordable, given that there is a surplus of £30 billion in the National Insurance Fund. I will give way one more time.
The honourable gentleman knows full well that policy he has set out was shot to pieces when the Permanent Secretary of the Department of Work and Pensions confirmed it's not even physically possible to use the surplus, and in many years it's in deficit. Will he accept that?
Well, I have to say, I think the honourable gentleman is due an apology to the WASPI women, because you cannot get away from the fact that the government's own actuarial department has indicated that the surplus this year is £30 billion. For goodness sake, use the surplus in that fund. Introduce mitigation for the WASPI women. It is the right thing to do, and I assure the Prime Minister that this issue is not going to go away. And let me commend members across the House, Conservative members that want action taken on this as well. You cannot defend that women have had notice of only 14 months in some cases. It's a failure of communication. It was far too swift a rise in pensionable age, and we must come back and address this issue in this Parliament. And I will commend the SNP that we will not lose sight of this issue, and we will stand foursquare behind the WASPI women in the months to come. I want to make some progress, and I'll happily take interventions later on. The Prime Minister's gamble backfired, and she's desperately clung to power, at least for now, and stumbled into the Brexit negotiations on Monday morning, regardless with an almost all-male team equipped with no credible plan, no mandate, and seemingly no functional government. Well, I can see the Prime Minister floundering, but where is the stable government that the Prime Minister promised us? It's not here. It is worth reflecting that last year's Queen's speech took place just 1 month before the nations of the United Kingdom voted on whether or not to remain a member of the European Union. Mr Speaker, in that referendum, Scotland voted clearly and decisively to remain in the European Union. Northern Ireland too voted to remain in the European Union. England and Wales, of course, voted to leave. There was a democratic divergence across the UK. I had hoped that a compromise might be found that would work for all nations of the United Kingdom. Indeed, the Prime Minister herself said that Article 50 would not be triggered until there was a UK approach, and that she was willing to listen to all options. That is why last year the Scottish Government, in good faith and in a spirit of compromise, published proposals in Scotland's place in Europe. Mr. Speaker, these are credible proposals that would mitigate the worst impacts of a hard Brexit. They would maintain the UK's membership of the single market while it leaves the EU, or failing that, would maintain Scotland's membership of the single market within the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way, and I congratulate him on his new role. Will he perhaps set a new tone for his party by recognising that in a democracy, when a referendum is settled so that Scotland remains in the UK, and the UK has a referendum which settles the matter, then perhaps it would be good to stand up for democracy? Could we hear something new from the other side?
I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and of course we in the Scottish National Party always accepted the result of the referendum in 2014. That is not in question. What I have to say to honourable members opposite is that we were promised that if we voted to stay within the United Kingdom, that our future in Europe would be protected. And what happened when we went to the country last year, that the Scottish National Party stood on a manifesto commitment that if Scotland was dragged out of the European Union against its will, then we reserved the right to give the people of Scotland an insurance policy that at the end of the Brexit process, that the people of Scotland would have the ability to have their say. And what I would say to the Conservatives opposite, that are chuntering from a sedentary position, is that we won that election to the Scottish Parliament. There was a vote that took place in the Scottish Parliament. 69 members of that Parliament voted to enact a referendum if the circumstances are right. 59 members voted against that. That is democracy. The people of Scotland have spoken, and it's about time that the Conservatives respected the sovereignty of the Scottish people. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to try and make some progress. The government document on the Queen's speech says that powers repatriated from the EU will be held at UK level until the UK then negotiates with the devolved governments. The government's Queen's Speech executive summary published today says the repeal bill will replicate the common UK frameworks created by EU law and UK law and maintain the scope of devolved decision-making powers immediately after exit. And it clarifies that they will be centralising fisheries and agricultural matters through specific bills on each. Page 22 tells us aspects of the bill will extend to the UK as international matters are not devolved. We will consult widely with the devolved administrations on the appropriate extent of any legislation. Mr. Speaker, this is the great power grab in action.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way, Mr. Speaker, and wish him all the best in his new position as leader of the Scottish National Party as well. But does he accept that some of the MPs, good honourable members, lost their seats because of their position on Brexit and Europe in relation to the fisheries? So it's very important, Mr. Speaker, that the Scottish National Party who are here commit themselves to the policy that we will take in this House to ensure that the fisheries across the whole of the United Kingdom and Great Britain and Northern Ireland are preserved and the peoples and their jobs are also preserved.
It's a devolved department.
I'm grateful for the intervention for the honourable member. The important point is that fisheries and agriculture are devolved. Yes. We will not sit back and see this land grab from Westminster. Powers over fishery and agriculture must remain with the Scottish Parliament, and there's going to be a real question for the Conservative members opposite. Whose side are they going to be on? Are they going to be on the side of London, or are they going to be on the side of the people of Scotland? And let me tell you that if they don't stand up for Scotland, then they will pay a price at the ballot box at future elections.
Exactly.
I must say, I know that many Conservatives that have come from Scotland are here for the first time. Can I respectfully suggest to them that if they do want to make an intervention, it's perhaps best to rise than it is to shout from a sedentary position. It's not the way that we tend to behave in this Parliament. I happily agree with you.
So will the SNP representative tell us what measures, if any, in this Queen's speech his party does support? Or should we tell the UK public they want to block everything and they're negative about every progressive proposal in our Queen's speech address?
My goodness. I think I've demonstrated in the remarks that I've been able to make so far that, of course, that we will support progressive politics, and of course we'll take action on abuse towards domestic violence and so on and so forth. If there are measures which are in the interest of the people of Scotland, then we will support them. Now, I've taken...
Well, my honourable friend,
I'll give you one last time.
Does my honourable friend, does my right honourable friend share my concern that the Scotland Office Minister who's going to be dealing with agriculture and fisheries is going to be a member of the House of Lords, and therefore not open to scrutiny by this House? And does he agree with me that it's a shame that the Prime Minister doesn't think the new Tories are of sufficient calibre to hold such a
That's an extremely important contribution that my honourable friend has made. I can't imagine what some of the new Conservatives must make of it, that they win an election and a colleague that couldn't unseat the member in Perthshire has had to be elevated to the House of Lords. Democracy in the United Kingdom. You lose an election, but you'll still end up in government. But not only that, we also find that as the individual who...
Order. I apologise to the right honourable gentleman having to interrupt. Members shouldn't chunter from a sedentary position, which is unparliamentary. Order! Mr Chairwarden, calm yourself and try to restore your equilibrium, your karma, which would be of benefit to you, probably to Hampshire, and certainly to the House. There's quite a lot of eccentric gesticulation with hands taking place, not least amongst new members. I hope they'll be cured of this malady before long. Mr Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I hope that the new members will appreciate your sage advice. But there's a very important point here, that we have a Conservative failed candidate being elevated to the House of Lords, standing down from his position in the European Parliament, and the Conservatives seem to want to appoint someone to the European Parliament who was fifth on their list.
They're going to get sued. They're getting sued now.
Sued by one of their own members. It's a very, very strange approach to democracy from the Scottish Conservatives. Mr Speaker, I want to make some progress. Membership of the single market could not be more important for Scotland. It contains 8 of our top 12 export destinations, supports 300,000 jobs in Scotland and contributes more than £11 billion to our economy. A hard Brexit would severely damage Scotland's economic, social and cultural interests. It will hit jobs and living standards deeply and permanently. That is why we are determined to avoid it. And that is true for the United Kingdom as well. The Prime Minister must now reflect that her party stood on a platform of a hard Brexit that has been roundly rejected by the electorate. There is no mandate for a hard Brexit. It is the Scottish Government's compromise approach that has been endorsed by the Scottish Parliament and now the people of Scotland as part of our manifesto commitment in the general election. So my message to the Prime Minister is very simple. It is time to listen. It is time to get back around the table with the devolved governments of the United Kingdom and work out a compromise that works for all in the United Kingdom and avoids the devastating damage that would be caused by a hard Brexit.
I'm very grateful to the honourable member for giving way. He will, of course, know the Prime Minister is very famous for her U-turns. At the moment, she currently wants out of the single market and she wants out of the customs union. Does he expect her to U-turn any time soon before she takes the UK over a cliff edge? And Scotland, of course, does have its parachute for safety from the carnage the Prime Minister is bringing.
I would encourage the Prime Minister to listen, and I think it is important that she reflects on what has happened in the election. I wouldn't see that as a U-turn. I would see that as a Prime Minister that perhaps begins to show leadership which is strong and stable if she's prepared to do it. Mr Speaker, at the heart of the compromise must be continued membership of the single market. I gently suggest to those on the Labour benches to reflect on their position as well. Voters in Scotland will have sat aghast at the sight of a Labour Shadow Secretary of State for Scotland, who I see is not in her place, who could not say whether she supported Scotland's voice being heard in the Brexit negotiations.
Shameful.
To capitulate to the Conservatives in the single market would be to sell out working families whose wages and prospects will be ultimately damaged by a hard Brexit. My challenge to Labour is to join with the Scottish National Party in seeking to get the single market back on the table as the best option, the only option, for protecting jobs, the economy and living standards. I will happily give way.
Yeah, I do agree with his position on unfettered access to the single market, but would you like to comment on what the Prime Minister has said, that, a bad deal is better than no deal? Right, so a no deal is better than a bad deal, and the Chancellor has said, of course, that no deal is very, very bad. And surely both can't be true, otherwise a very, very bad deal would be better than a bad deal. But would he agree that clearly we do need to get a deal where we maximise jobs and access to the marketplace?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, I think he's really got to speak to his own colleagues, and he's got to say to them, if you want to stand up for the people in this country, then you've got to join with us, and you've got to demand that we remain members of the single market. That is the salient point to this. Mr Speaker, the Queen's speech doesn't just fail on minimising the impact of Brexit. It falls even harder on reversing the damage caused by almost a decade of austerity. For this Tory government, austerity cuts are not simply a policy response to a particular economic situation. They are an ideology and a political choice. It is a political choice. Well, I hear somebody shouting from a sedentary position nonsense. And let me say politely to the government that in 2009 we embarked on a policy of quantitative easing. Now, I would suspect that everyone in this House supported the fact that we needed to take monetary policy action in 2009. We're now sitting in a situation that there's been £430 billion worth of intervention in the markets. The point about this is we have not taken the fiscal measures in order to deliver sustainable economic growth that had to sit hand in hand with the action that was taken on monetary policy. What we have done is that we have underpinned the financial markets as a direct consequence of the quantitative easing. Those with assets have done well. The financial markets have increased by more than 70% over those years. The tragedy is real wages have declined, and the responsibility for the economic management rests with the government opposite. And it's that charge sheet that we have not looked after the working people of this country. But what we have done is making sure those with financial assets have done very well. That is the specific charge, and that is why the government can and must change course. It is a political choice that has put certain groups of people in the crosshairs: working families, those on low incomes just managing to get by, and the disabled and the vulnerable who rely on support from social security. And social security, I use that phrase for a very clear purpose, because that's what we talk about in Scotland. The government in London talks about welfare. That perhaps is why you have a problem, because you don't realise it's about the importance of that safety net. Our society is simply as strong as its weakest link.
On that point, an honourable friend, I'm grateful for my honourable friend for giving way. Does he agree with me that those people who are most under pressure are going to find it even worse if the government continues with its shambolic rollout of universal credit full service, which has been rolling ahead of schedule in the Highlands and is hurting people deeply every day, those seeking work, the disabled and those who are working?
Well, I commend my honourable friend for the work that he's done in this area, and I know that he has had many constituents that have come to him that have been enormously impacted by the changes, and it is important that the government reflects on the impact that these changes have had and they've taken place and they change course. I need to make some progress, I apologise. We know that a decade of austerity will see the highest inequality since the Conservative government under Margaret Thatcher. Whilst the Tories on the government benches might proclaim cuts to government spending, it means real pain and hardship for people across the country. The SNP have consistently opposed austerity, and we are offering a credible alternative. Our approach to the public finances would balance the UK budget for day-to-day spending by the end of the Parliament. It would set debt on a downward path and, crucially, would also free up an additional £118 billion of public investment over the Parliament to grow the economy, safeguarding public services and protecting household incomes. A clear alternative to 5 more years of Tory austerity, investment and hope, not more disruptive cuts. Those on low income who rely on in-work social security and the vulnerable and the disabled face a further £9 billion of additional social security cuts from this Tory government. There is an alternative. Where Labour have only pledged to reverse less than a quarter of these cuts, SNP MPs will stand against all of the further planned cuts to social security. Our pensioners too now face real pain from Tory austerity. The government's intention to remove the triple lock and raid the winter fuel allowance will hit pensioners hard at a time when their budgets are hard pressed. Mr. Speaker, in the Highlands of Scotland, 77% of pensioners are in fuel poverty. Until we have driven fuel poverty out of our society, we need to make sure that we are standing up for the rights of our pensioners.
I just wondered if the honourable gentleman has factored into the description you've just given of the finances in Scotland the Barnett formula. Without the Barnett formula, and given the fact that there is such a catastrophe in the Scottish finances at the moment, are they still insisting that the Barnett formula has to be applied?
Well, I have to say, I find that quite extraordinary, because the real terms cut to the Scottish budget over the last 10 years has been about £2.9 billion, and it's simply because of Tory austerity. Yes, we support the Barnett formula because it's done on a needs basis. You know, it is interesting that others have wanted to take that away. It's not the SNP that's a threat to public finances in Scotland, it's those that want to attack the Barnett formula. Let me make it absolutely clear that in any backdoor deal which is done with the DUP, if there's any increase in spending in Northern Ireland, and we of course would welcome additional spending in Northern Ireland, that must be reflected through the Barnett formula. Scotland must be protected by any deal that the Conservatives do. SNP MPs will oppose the removal of the triple lock so that our pensioners will see the pension that they work for, and that they will continue to support the WASPI movement and campaign to secure fairness. The government must act with speed to address the WASPI issue. The Prime Minister and her government must reflect on the circumstances that the WASPI women are in and put in place mitigation. Mr. Speaker, the most startling impact of austerity is the effect it has on children and working families. The income of the poorest third of working-age households will fall by 10% over the next 4 years, driving a further 1 million children across the United Kingdom into poverty. It was no wonder that in the last Parliament that the previous Secretary for Work and Pensions wanted to redefine child poverty, because, quite simply, the numbers are eye-watering and shameful. By 2021, there could be more than 5 million children across the United Kingdom, a number equivalent to the total population of Scotland, living in poverty in one of the richest countries in the world. Mr. Speaker, above all, austerity erodes our public services at a time when more than ever we need to ensure that our public services are well funded and delivering for people in our communities. In this Parliament, SNP MPs will champion our public services. Over the last 10 years, the SNP Scottish Government has prioritised the health service and will continue to do so. Our NHS, like health services across the world, faces real challenges. However, in Scotland, patient satisfaction is at record levels. Our hospitals, A&Es, are the best performing in the United Kingdom. Many nurses are better paid in Scotland than they are in the rest of the UK. Our health service in Scotland will be £2 billion better off by the end of this Parliament. However, we want to go further. If the UK Government chose to increase health spending per head of population in England to the current Scottish level, which is 7% higher, that would mean more money for the NHS, not just in Scotland, but right across the United Kingdom. It would increase the health budget in England by £11 billion, more than inflation by 2022, and it would deliver funding to support additional investment in Scotland's NHS of up to £1 billion. Making sure that everyone has a safe, warm and affordable home is central to the SNP's Scottish Government's drive to make this country fairer and more prosperous. Over the last parliamentary term, the SNP Government invested more than £1.7 billion in affordable housing. We are delivering over 30,000 new affordable homes, and we've targeted 50,000 affordable homes by the end of this Parliament. High-quality and well-funded public services, a growing economy with investment in business, and a fairer and more equal country is the alternative to austerity. Having been denied their majority by the public, I had hoped that this Queen's speech might signal a government that was more willing to listen and compromise, but I see scant evidence of that today. The SNP has been a real and effective opposition in the last Parliament. It was the SNP that led the challenge to the proposed cuts to working tax credits, that led to a coalition here and elsewhere that forced the government to change course. It was my friend and colleague, the member for Glasgow Central, who championed the campaign against the changes to tax credits for families with more than 2 children, what became known as the rape clause. We asked the government again to revisit this issue. I'll happily give way.
Thank you for giving way and for mentioning the campaign on the rape clause. Does he agree that it is such a contrast that the Scottish Government today launches a social security system which talks about social security as a human right, whereas the rape clause actually is in breach of women and children's human rights?
I absolutely agree, and I know that the Prime Minister is in her place, and I hope that she's listened very carefully to what my honourable friend has said, and that this is an issue that the Government will reflect on and deal with in short order. In conclusion, Mr Speaker, well, I can happily go on. Faced with a right-wing Tory government pursuing an austerity agenda that has little mandate to implement, the SNP will bring forward our own amendment to the Queen's speech that will seek a change of direction towards the progressive policies that our public services and the economy needs. In this Parliament of minorities, the SNP will take every opportunity to further Scotland's interests. SNP members will be prepared to work with parties across this chamber to deliver more progressive, fairer policies that serve the interests of the people of this country. In this Parliament, SNP MPs will ensure that Scotland's voice is heard louder and clearer than ever before.